This is HOA Spot. Let me set the scene in one breath. I am standing in my driveway at 7:30 in the morning, holding a snow shovel, and Carol Thompson is screaming at me that my work van is a commercial vehicle, and I am in violation of parking restrictions, and I have 72 hours to move it or face a $500 fine and possible towing. The van is covered in 6 inches of fresh snow. It has been parked in my driveway on my property since I moved into this neighborhood in Portland, Maine 3 months ago. I took this assistant coaching job at the high school because I wanted a quieter life after years of traveling for work, and I thought a small neighborhood outside the city would be peaceful. The Heights at Northwind HOA board had other ideas. Carol is the rules enforcement chair, which apparently means she patrols the streets at dawn looking for violations, and today she has decided my van is her target. She is wearing a blue puffer coat and a pink knit beanie, and she is holding a stack of chalk sticks like they are official government documents. She taps them against her palm while she talks, and every time she does it, a little puff of chalk dust comes off. "You do not shovel to my standard, you pay to my standard," she says, jabbing one of the chalk sticks toward the cleared section of my driveway. That is the 3rd time she has said that exact phrase in the last 2 minutes, and I am starting to think it is her personal motto. I do not know what shoveling has to do with my van, I say, but she cuts me off. "Everything has to do with everything," she snaps. "You think you can park a commercial vehicle in a residential zone and then half clear your driveway and ignore the sidewalk width requirements and just get away with it? I do not need proof. I have paperwork and vibes." The paperwork she is waving is a printed email with highlighter marks all over it, and the vibes are apparently her personal feelings about my existence. I can see a dog walker across the street filming this on their phone, which is either going to save me or embarrass me depending on how this goes. I moved to Portland because I wanted to be near the ocean and near the school where I coach, and I thought this neighborhood would be low drama. The Heights at Northwind is a collection of townhouses and small single-family homes built in the early 2000s, and the HOA runs everything from the mail cluster to the guest parking to the snow removal schedule. The rules are posted on a board near the mailboxes, but they change every week depending on who is mad about what. Carol has been the rules enforcement chair for 2 years, and according to my neighbor, she has filed more violation complaints than everyone else combined. Her thing is measurement. She carries a cheap measuring tape everywhere, the kind you get at a hardware store for $3, and she uses it to measure shoveled widths, car bumper overhangs, and trash can placement. If you are even an inch off, you get a notice. My van is not a commercial vehicle in any legal sense. It is a personal vehicle I use to haul sports equipment for the team. It has no business logos, no commercial plates, and no advertising. But it is a van, and Carol has decided that is enough. She keeps talking, and I realize she is not actually here to have a conversation. She is here to deliver a threat and then leave. The 72-hour deadline is today, which means the notice was supposedly sent 3 days ago, but I never got it. I check my mailbox every day. I ask her about this, and she waves her hand. "The notice was posted electronically," she says. "Check the portal." We have a neighborhood portal that the HOA uses to send updates, but I have not logged in since I moved in because nobody told me I had to. Apparently, that is my fault. "If you do not move the van by end of day, we will proceed with enforcement," she says. That means towing, and you will pay the fees. I ask her what rule I am violating, and she pulls out her phone and starts reading from a document. Section 4.7, no commercial vehicles in residential driveways except for active loading or unloading. I ask her how my van is commercial, and she says it is obvious. I ask her what makes it obvious, and she says she does not need to explain herself. You do not shovel to my standard, you pay to my standard, she says again, and then she turns and walks away, her boots crunching on the snow. I stand there for a minute, holding the shovel, watching her disappear around the corner. The dog walker is still filming. I wave at them, and they give me a thumbs up. I do not know if that is solidarity or mockery. I go inside and check the portal. Sure enough, there is a notice dated 3 days ago, posted at 11:58 at night. The subject line is Violation Notice, Commercial Vehicle Parking, and the body is 2 paragraphs of dense text citing rules I have never heard of. At the bottom it says I have 72 hours to comply or face a $500 fine and immediate towing. The notice is signed by Carol Thompson, Rules Enforcement Chair, and countersigned by the Property Management Company, which is a regional firm that handles 6 or 7 HOA communities in the Portland area. I do not recognize the name of the person who countersigned it, but the signature looks like it was done with a mouse. I call the management company, and after 15 minutes on hold, I get a woman named Jessica who sounds like she is reading from a script. She tells me the notice is valid, the rule is enforceable, and I need to move the van or appeal in writing within 24 hours. I ask her how I am supposed to appeal if the notice was only posted 3 days ago and I am just now seeing it, and she says the portal counts as official notification. I ask her if there is any flexibility, and she says no. I ask her if I can get an extension, and she says no. I ask her if I can speak to someone above her, and she puts me on hold again. When she comes back, she says the regional manager will review my case, but I still need to file the written appeal by end of day today. Today is the last day of the appeal window, which means Carol timed this perfectly. If I do not file by 5 o'clock, the fine goes into effect automatically, and the towing authorization gets issued. I do not have time to hire a lawyer, and I do not have time to dig through the HOA bylaws to figure out if this is even legal. I do have time to get mad. I spend the next 2 hours writing an appeal. I cite the rule Carol referenced, and I point out that my van does not meet the definition of a commercial vehicle under Maine state law. I attach photos of the van showing no logos, no commercial plates, and no signage. I explain that I use it for personal purposes related to my job, which is coaching, and that coaching equipment is not commercial cargo. I submit the appeal at 2 in the afternoon, and I get an automated reply saying it will be reviewed within 5 business days. That does not help me, because the towing is supposed to happen tonight. I call Jessica again, and this time I get a different person, a man named Doug, who tells me the appeal does not stop enforcement. I ask him what the point of an appeal is if it does not stop enforcement, and he says the appeal determines whether the fine is upheld. If I win the appeal, I get a refund. If I lose, the fine stands, and I still pay the towing fees. I ask him if that seems fair, and he says he does not make the rules. I hang up and go outside. The van is still in the driveway, still covered in snow. I start clearing it off with a brush, and halfway through, Carol appears again. She is holding her measuring tape and a clipboard, and she has a phone mounted on a gimbal, which she is using to film me. "You are not in compliance," she says. "You have 2 hours." I ignore her and keep brushing snow off the van. She walks around to the front and measures the distance from my bumper to the sidewalk. She writes something on the clipboard. Then she measures the width of the cleared section of my driveway and writes something else. "You also have a shoveling violation," she says. "Your cleared path is only 34 inches wide. The requirement is 36 inches. I look at the driveway. It is definitely wider than 34 inches. I ask her to measure again, and she refuses. She says her measurement is official and binding. I ask her what happens if I shovel it wider, and she says it is too late because the violation already occurred. This is insane, I say, and she smiles. You do not shovel to my standard, you pay to my standard, she says, and then she walks away again, still filming. I call my neighbor, a guy named Eric, who has lived here for 5 years. He is the one who warned me about Carol when I moved in, but I did not take him seriously at the time. He answers on the second ring, and I explain what is happening. He sighs. Yeah, that is Carol, he says. She does this to everyone. Last year she tried to fine me for having a wreath on my door in January because it was a fire hazard. She made up the rule. I ask him if anyone has ever fought her and won, and he says a couple of people have, but it takes months and costs more than the fine. Most people just pay and move on. I do not want to pay, I say. Then you need proof, he says, and you need it fast. He tells me about a guy named Marcus who lives 2 streets over. Marcus has a drone, and he uses it to film the neighborhood during snowstorms because he is into weather photography. Eric thinks Marcus might have footage of my driveway from the last few days, which would show that my van has been parked there the whole time and that Carol never posted any physical notice on my door. I call Marcus, and he agrees to meet me at his place in 20 minutes. When I get there, he has his laptop open, and he is already scrubbing through footage. He has hours of aerial video from the last week, all of it shot from high enough that you can see the whole block. He finds a clip from 3 days ago, the day the notice was supposedly posted. The timestamp shows 11:30 at night, which is 30 minutes before the portal notice went up. The video shows my driveway, my van, and my front door. There is no person walking up to the door. There is no paper on the door. There is nothing. Can you send me this? I ask, and he nods. He exports the clip and emails it to me, along with 2 other clips showing my van in the same spot on different days. I thank him and head back home. By the time I get home, it is 4:30, and I have 30 minutes until the appeal deadline. I add the drone footage to my appeal as attachments, and I write a new paragraph explaining that Carol never physically posted a notice and that the portal notification does not meet the requirement for proper notice under the HOA bylaws, which state that violations must be delivered in writing to the homeo owner. I submit the revised appeal at 4:55, 5 minutes before the deadline. The automated reply is the same as before. At 6 o'clock, I hear a truck engine outside. I look out the window, and there is a tow truck idling in front of my house. Carol is standing next to it, talking to the driver and pointing at my van. She is holding her clipboard and gesturing like an air traffic controller. I grab my phone and the printed email chain from the management company and run outside. The driver is a big guy in a reflective vest, and he is already pulling the wheel lift off the back of the truck. Carol sees me coming and steps in front of me. "You are out of time," she says. "The van is being towed." I hold up the email chain and tell the driver that I filed an appeal and that the towing is not authorized until the appeal is reviewed. Carol interrupts and says the appeal does not stop enforcement. The driver looks between us, clearly not wanting to be in the middle of this. I pull up the drone footage on my phone and show it to him. I explain that Carol never posted a physical notice and that the rule she is citing does not apply to my van because it is not a commercial vehicle. I show him the photos of the van with no logos and no commercial plates. The driver looks at the footage, then at Carol, then at the van. He puts the wheel lift back on the truck. I am not hooking this up until you two figure it out, he says. Call me when you have it sorted. He gets in the truck and drives away. Carol is furious. She starts yelling at me, saying I am obstructing enforcement and that she is going to add another violation for harassment. I tell her I have not harassed anyone, and she says showing the driver the footage counts as harassment because it interfered with her authority. The next morning, I get an email from the management company. It is from someone named Linda, and it says my appeal has been reviewed and denied. The reason given is that the van meets the visual criteria for a commercial vehicle regardless of its legal classification, and that the HOA has the right to enforce aesthetic standards. The email also says the fine is now active, and I have 24 hours to pay it or face a lien on my property. The towing authorization has been reissued, and the truck will return tonight. I call Linda and ask her what visual criteria means. She says the van is large and utilitarian, and that it disrupts the residential character of the neighborhood. I ask her if there is a rule that defines residential character, and she says it is a judgment call. I ask her who makes the judgment, and she says the rules enforcement chair, which is Carol. So Carol decides what is commercial based on her feelings, I say, and Linda says that is not how she would phrase it, but essentially yes. I ask her if I can escalate this to the board, and she says I can request a hearing, but the next board meeting is not until next month, and the fine is due now. I ask her if the fine can be suspended until the hearing, and she says no. I hang up and sit in my kitchen staring at the email. I have 24 hours to pay $500 for a violation I did not commit, or I get a lien on my property and my van gets towed. My small business reputation is at risk because the HOA is spreading lies about my van being commercial, and if word gets out that I am in violation of neighborhood rules, it could hurt my credibility with the school. I let her call my bluff because she did not realize I was not bluffing. I spend the rest of the day digging through the HOA bylaws, which are posted on the portal as a 60-page PDF. On page 37, I find a section about towing. It says that towing can only be authorized by the board president or the property management company, and only after a physical notice has been delivered to the homeowner and a 48-hour grace period has passed. Carol is not the board president. She is the rules enforcement chair, which means she can file complaints, but she cannot authorize towing. The email from Linda says the towing authorization has been reissued, but it does not say who issued it. I call Linda again and ask her directly if Carol authorized the tow. She hesitates and then says she will have to check. She puts me on hold for 10 minutes. When she comes back, she says the towing was requested by Carol but approved by the board president, a man named Roger. I ask her if Roger reviewed my appeal, and she says she does not know. I ask her for Roger's contact information, and she says she cannot give that out. I ask her how I am supposed to escalate my case if I cannot contact the person in charge, and she says I can send an email to the general board address and it will be forwarded. I send an email to the board address explaining everything. I attach the drone footage, the photos of the van, and the relevant section of the bylaws about towing. I send it at 3 in the afternoon, and I get an automated reply saying the board will respond within 5 business days. At 6 o'clock, the tow truck comes back. This time, Carol is not there, but the driver is the same guy from yesterday. He pulls up in front of my house and gets out. I go outside and tell him I am still appealing, and he says he has a work order and he has to follow it. I show him the email I sent to the board, and I show him the section of the bylaws about towing authorization. He reads it and shakes his head. "Look, man, I just do what the company tells me, he says. If you have a problem, take it up with them. I ask him who issued the work order, and he shows me a printout. It is from the management company, and it lists Carol as the requesting party. There is no mention of Roger or the board president. This is not authorized, I say, and he shrugs. Not my call, he says, and he starts hooking up the van. I call the non-emergency police line and explain the situation. The dispatcher says it sounds like a civil matter, but she will send an officer to document it. The officer arrives 10 minutes later, and by that time the van is already on the lift. The officer talks to the driver, then to me, then to the driver again. He looks at the printout and the bylaws and the email chain. He tells the driver that the towing might not be authorized, and the driver says he is just doing his job. The officer says he cannot stop the tow because it is a civil matter, but he will write a report. The van gets towed. I stand in my driveway, watching it disappear down the street. The officer hands me a copy of the report and tells me to contact a lawyer. Then he leaves. I go inside and call the tow yard. They tell me the van is being held for HOA violations, and I can pick it up once I pay the fine and the towing fees, which total $800. I ask them if I can get the van back without paying, and they say no. I do not have $800 to throw away on a fake violation, so I call a lawyer. I get a referral from a friend, and I end up talking to a woman named Angela who specializes in HOA disputes. She listens to my story and asks me to send her all the documentation. She calls me back 2 hours later and says I have a strong case. The towing was not properly authorized, the notice was not properly delivered, and the rule itself is questionable. She says she can send a demand letter to the HOA and the management company, and if they do not respond, she can file for an injunction. I ask her how much this will cost, and she says her retainer is $1,500. I do not have that kind of money lying around, but I also do not have a choice. I pay the retainer, and she gets to work. The next day, Angela sends a demand letter to the management company and the HOA board. The letter lays out the violations of the bylaws, cites the drone footage as proof of improper notice, and demands that the van be released immediately and that all fines and fees be waived. It also demands that Carol be removed from any involvement in my case and that the board issue a written reversal. We do not hear back for 3 days. On the 4th day, I get an email from Linda saying the board has reviewed the demand letter and they are willing to negotiate. She says they will waive the towing fees if I pay the fine, and they will consider my appeal at the next board meeting. Angela replies and says no. She says the entire violation is invalid, and we are demanding full reimbursement of all costs, including the lawyer fees. She also says that if they do not comply, we will file for an injunction and a harassment claim. Linda does not reply. 2 days later, I get a call from Roger, the board president. He sounds tired. He says he reviewed my case, and he agrees that the towing was not handled correctly. He says Carol acted outside her authority, and the management company should not have issued the work order without his approval. I ask him why Carol is still in charge of enforcement, and he says the board is discussing it. I ask him if I am going to get my van back, and he says yes, but it will take a few days to process the paperwork. I do not trust him, so I tell Angela, and she files for an emergency injunction. The hearing is scheduled for the following week at the City Code Enforcement Counter, which is in a municipal building downtown. The day of the hearing, I show up with Angela and all the documentation. Carol is there with Linda and a lawyer from the management company. Roger is not there. The hearing officer is a woman named Patricia. and she listens to both sides. Angela presents the drone footage, the email chain, the bylaws, and the demand letter. Carol argues that the van is disruptive and that I am trying to circumvent the rules with technicalities. Patricia asks Carol if she authorized the tow, and Carol says yes. Patricia asks her if she is the board president, and Carol says no, but she is the rules enforcement chair and she has authority to enforce violations. Patricia looks at the bylaws and asks Carol to show her where it says the rules enforcement chair can authorize towing. Carol flips through a printed copy of the bylaws and cannot find it. She says it is implied. Patricia asks Linda if the management company verified the authorization before issuing the work order, and Linda says they relied on Carol's request. Patricia asks if they checked with the board president, and Linda says no. Patricia rules that the towing was not authorized and that the violation notice was not properly delivered. She orders the van to be released immediately, and she orders the HOA to void the fine and reimburse all towing fees. She also orders the HOA to stop all enforcement actions against me until the board reviews the rules and clarifies the authorization process. Carol tries to argue, but Patricia cuts her off. She says the ruling is final, and if Carol has a problem with it, she can appeal to the county. We leave the building, and Angela tells me the injunction is a good start, but I should also file a complaint with the State Attorney General's office about the HOA's practices. She says if other homeowners have had similar problems, the state might investigate. I file the complaint that night. 2 weeks later, I get a letter from the Attorney General's office saying they are opening an inquiry into the Heights at Northwind HOA board and the management company. In the meantime, I get my van back. The tow yard releases it without charging me, and I drive it home and park it in my driveway. Carol is standing on the sidewalk when I pull in, and she glares at me but does not say anything. The next board meeting happens 3 weeks after the hearing. I attend, along with Angela and about a dozen other neighbors who have had problems with Carol. The meeting is in the community room near the mail cluster, and it is packed. Roger opens the meeting by saying the board has reviewed the recent enforcement actions, and they have determined that some mistakes were made. He says the board is implementing new policies to ensure that all violations are properly documented and authorized before enforcement. One of the neighbors raises her hand and asks if Carol is going to be removed from the rules enforcement chair position. Roger hesitates and says that is a personnel matter that will be discussed in executive session. Angela stands up and says that is not good enough. She says Carol has a pattern of overreach and harassment, and the board needs to take action now. She cites my case and 2 other cases from neighbors in the room. Roger says he understands the concerns, but he cannot make personnel decisions in a public meeting. Angela says the board can vote to remove Carol from her position, and it does not require executive session. Someone in the back of the room starts clapping, and soon the whole room is clapping. Roger looks uncomfortable. He calls for a 5-minute recess. When the meeting resumes, Roger announces that the board has voted to remove Carol from the rules enforcement chair position and to create a new oversight committee to review all enforcement actions before they go forward. He also announces that the board is terminating the contract with the current management company and hiring a new one. Carol stands up and starts yelling. She says the board is caving to pressure and that the rules are going to fall apart without her. Roger tells her she is out of order, and she storms out of the room. If you are enjoying this HOA chaos, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories like this one. A week after the meeting, I get a formal letter from the new management company. It is a written reversal of the violation, signed by the new property manager and countersigned by Roger. The letter says the violation was issued in error and all fines and fees have been voided. It also says the HOA is implementing new rules to prevent similar issues in the future. The letter includes an apology, which I was not expecting. It says the board regrets the inconvenience and the stress, and they are committed to improving the enforcement process. I also get a separate letter from the Attorney General's office saying their inquiry found multiple violations of state HOA regulations by the Heights at Northwind HOA Board and the Old Management Company. The state is requiring the board to implement training for all board members and to adopt a new dispute resolution policy. The Old Management Company has been fined. Carol is no longer involved in enforcement. According to Eric, she tried to run for board president in the next election, but she lost by a landslide. She still lives in the neighborhood, but she keeps to herself now. A few weeks after everything settles, I am outside shoveling my driveway after another snowstorm. I see Carol walking past with her measuring tape in her pocket, but she does not stop. She does not even look at me. I wave and she ignores me. Eric comes over and helps me finish shoveling. He tells me the new enforcement committee is working well, and there have been no bogus violations since Carol was removed. He also tells me that 2 other board members resigned after the Attorney General's report came out, and the board is being rebuilt from scratch. I ask him if he thinks the neighborhood will ever go back to normal, and he laughs. He says this is normal for an HOA. The trick is making sure the right people are in charge. I finish shoveling and go inside. My van is still in the driveway, and it is going to stay there. A month later, I get a call from Marcus, the drone guy. He tells me he has been contacted by a local news station that is doing a story on HOA overreach in Maine. They want to interview me and use the drone footage. I agree, and the story airs 2 weeks later. The segment is about 5 minutes long, and it covers my case along with 2 other cases from different HOA neighborhoods. The reporter talks about the lack of oversight and the potential for abuse, and she interviews Angela about what homeowners can do to protect themselves. The day after the segment airs, I get a message from someone in a different HOA community asking for advice. Then I get another message, and another. By the end of the week, I have a dozen messages from people dealing with similar problems. I start responding to them and sharing Angela's contact information. Some of them end up hiring her, and some of them use the information to fight their HOAs on their own. A few of them win. The Heights at Northwind HOA Board holds a town hall meeting to discuss the changes they are making. I attend, and so do most of the neighbors. The new board president, a woman named Karen, explains the new enforcement process. Every violation will be reviewed by the Oversight Committee before any action is taken, and homeowners will have a right to appeal before any fines are issued. Someone asks what happens if the committee makes a mistake, and Karen says there is a mediation process. She also says the board is working on a transparency policy to make sure all enforcement actions are documented and available for review. The meeting ends with a vote to adopt the new policies, and they pass unanimously. Carol is not there. A few months later, I am at the high school gym setting up equipment for practice. One of the other coaches asks me how things are going with the HOA, and I tell him it is finally settled. He tells me he lives in an HOA too, and he has been getting harassed over his Christmas lights. I tell him about Angela, and I tell him about the Attorney General's complaint process. He takes notes and thanks me. That night, I am at home, and I get an email from the new management company. It is a survey asking me to rate my experience with the enforcement process. I give them a high rating for the reversal and the apology, and a low rating for the initial handling. In the comments section, I write that the board needs to keep the Oversight Committee in place. and that Carol should never be allowed back into a leadership position. I submit the survey and close my laptop. My van is still in the driveway, covered in fresh snow. I will shovel it out tomorrow. The HOA votes to require actual evidence before fines, and Carol is ordered to stop contacting me directly. The new policies are working, and the neighborhood is calmer than it has been in years. I do not see Carol much anymore. When I do, she does not speak to me, and I do not speak to her. Her phone died mid-rant during one of the final arguments at the hearing, and she froze in place like a robot shutting down. It was the funniest thing I have ever seen, and I will never forget it. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.